All right, I think we'll begin. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. Act 4 and the close of Chantecler. This morning, when I was trying to get my dog settled so that I could conduct this session, I got her favorite bone to keep her occupied. And when she saw it, her feet were scrambling under her like a cartoon character where she wasn't actually making any forward progress. But it was such excitement. And I sort of feel like that in starting this conversation. There's so much I want to say. And because there's so much I want to say, I fear that I'm going to not make meaningful progress because of it. So I need to take a deep breath and proceed systematically so that we actually talk about something meaningful. So because what I want to do is skip straight to what I see as the theme and the integrations I see in all the conversations we've had so far, but I think it'll be better to discuss Act 4 first and then come to those broader integrations. So we'll start with the beginning of Act 4. And Chantecler had agreed to flee to the woods with the pheasant hen after being betrayed and abandoned in his home. And in Rostand's plays, I feel like you have to be very careful to read stage directions. I'm not a director. I don't know a lot about the function of stage directions or how different artists use them differently. But here it said, and this is, I think, K. Nolte Smith translation, "The green asylum sought by all disappointed hearts," is how the forest is described. The shadow that simplifies and the peace that soothes. How far away is the world? So it seemed to me metaphorically like succumbing to that temptation when you face trouble in your work, to run away, to escape, to seek peace and comfort. We've all had that feeling on vacations, I'm sure. So both seemingly agreeing to put the pheasant first, although we'll talk about that when it comes, but just agreeing to abandon his calling in the moment. Sue, any thoughts about the forest and what it represents for him?
Well, it's a contrast, isn't it, with nature, with the farmyard. And after the last scene, it's also a contrast with the awful salon. Here, one is much closer to life and to God, if you like. It's much more natural surrounding, much more sacred in a way. You know, it is a complete contrast. Mm-hmm. And Chantecler, of course, is the wounded soul.
Mm-hmm. So it's closer to nature and closer to God, but still not where he ought to be ultimately, which is
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
He needs to be home to continue his work and his calling and his vocation. So there's something about it that's even though it is offering those values as a setting, it's still an abandonment for him to go and enjoy them.
He has left his job behind, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so first in this act, we had that little evening prayer of the birds, and I had the sense again that I'm missing out completely by not reading this in the French, because it was such a sweet little prayer. And what it felt to me was like there was that image in the beginning of the rake being beautiful when illuminated by the sun, that there are things that are overlooked sources of beauty. And it was almost like the birds were being illuminated like the rake. That's what it felt like to me. That man.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. I'm here. Rostand is seeing everything from the bird's point of view, isn't he? Sorry, my phone's just It's lovely how he imagines himself into the soul of the birds.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's, I think, in a sense, extrapolating from that, that's what Rostand is good about doing with the world in general, is imagining himself into the soul of things, which means seeing the value in them, seeing into the heart of them. And so I forget what some of the images were, but just the work that they're hunted by man, but they do work for him, and that's overlooked. And it was just a lot of sweet little phrases capturing what might be overlooked about their beauty and their purpose. Okay, but let's get to the pheasant. What the pheasant is doing in bringing him, luring him into the forest. She's trying to persuade him to make her the center of his universe, or her the higher value than the sun. And there were amazing lines in this section that it's, I found myself too often looking for something directly metaphorical, and I found it helpful in this act to sort of step back and see it as metaphorical, but not as concretely metaphorical as I sometimes try to seek. So I love the line, you see that one may have the dawn at a smaller cost. Is the sky less red because you sing just once? Because she thinks she's limited him to singing his song just once for the month, and yet the sun comes up on its own. But of course, he's been crowing every morning without her knowing it. But you see that one may have the dawn at a smaller cost. Well, anyone who's become wholly consumed by their work, because it's such a passion and because it makes that demand on them, can sympathize with this phrasing. The world will turn without you. You need not be so obsessive and consumed by your work, but you do need to be, the creator needs to be, in a sense. So, and that's what's being emphasized here.
The pheasant has such a commercial, practical attitude. Her values are so different from Chantecler's.
So a few more lines in that scene. So once again, this act has some of the most rhapsodically beautiful lines and phrases, and it's so uninhibitedly romantic, like the rest of Rostand. And I'm astounded how he's able to include humor, weave humor into this romanticism without undermining the romanticism. It would be, that's a delicate act to play, I think, because it would be very easy to feel like you're not meant to take seriously the romanticism of it because you're laughing, but it's always, and interestingly, when I've seen Cyrano de Bergerac performed, one of my struggles in watching the performance has been that laughter will sometimes bleed in the audience into scenes that I think are meant to be regarded very reverently. So when I saw it on Broadway, even in the balcony scene, people were laughing. And I think that's a little bit, it might be, I don't want to assign blame. Blame seems the wrong word, but I think it's a little bit in the responsibility of the director, because it would be so hard to capture that sincerity when the scenes are sincere, and still play to the laughter. But the audience might just be also so unaccustomed to that they don't know exactly how to react to it.
That must be a failure on the director's part, I think.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
But in any case, Victor Hugo was very keen on mixing the genres, wasn't he? Like Shakespeare, in fact, the humor in Shakespeare, and it only sets, it balances, perhaps, in the hands of a good director. I mean, here, Rostand has a lot of fun, really, with Chantecler doing things behind the pheasant's back.
And then tell me if I interpreted this line correctly, because I recognize that it's translated. But when the pheasant says, "You love me more than her," and Chantecler says, "Look out, a snare." Well, there is literally a snare behind her, but is he not falling prey to a snare with that question? I had to assume there was a pun there.
I hadn't thought of that, but it was clever dramatics, because Chantecler can avoid answering the question, which is very helpful for him. And of course, the snare does play a large part in the act later on.
Yes, it does.
So he's alerting us to it. And yes, Chantecler very, very pleased, I think, to avoid it. Yes.
So I think the fact that it allowed him the opportunity to escape the question, that seems like support for my interpretation. That he is also
yes. Oh yes, absolutely, yes,
calling it a snare. So, oh, and also another line of humor that just delighted me was her saying, "Say it's me," and then the pedantic woodpecker pipes in to correct her grammar and says, "It's I," and Chantecler says, "Not in a love scene."
There's more humor. I mean, this is the interruptions of the woodpecker are more humor, aren't they?
Yes.
Yes, this is all very light-hearted before the serious part of the act gets going, really. Yeah.
So at the very beginning, Greta brought up this issue of the role of women, or what Rostand is suggesting is the role of women. And while I believe that Rostand had great respect for women and their potential, I do believe he also was of his time. And the woman donning the robes of the male was her kind of stepping outside of her proper role in regard to Chantecler. And so there was this line in this section where it said, "Still you're female, always seeing ideas as rivals." And so I guess there's two parts of it. One is, is she embracing her proper role in relationship to the world, and then specifically in relationship to him? Is that what you see in that character?
Yes, I do see that. But I mean, and you rightly stress that Rostand himself had every respect for women, and particularly for Simone, actually, who played the golden pheasant. So, but I think as well, this may seem a bit misogynistic, but Rostand himself, being a man, is writing from a man's point of view. And you could equally have a woman writing a play like this and saying, men are a nuisance because they always want to whisk me away to make love, or something like that. Well, I'm trying to do great things. So we have to take that into account as well, I think, that he's seeing everything from a male standpoint. And she is really hindering his work. Yes, definitely.
I think that speaks to the thing I was talking about before, with the looking at the metaphors a little more abstractly, that again, when I think it's going to be helpful to step back, and you had said that this play is about the struggles of the artist, or the struggles of the poet. There was really Rostand speaking from his own soul. And at the end, I like to just kind of step back and look at what each of those struggles is that has been presented here. But one of them is the claims of other values on your time and your soul. And that's a universal kind of struggle and conflict that every human being has. And so this might be the particular form that it manifests here, but that, feeling as if you're abandoning other values of yours, or feeling an uncertainty about where they ought to be in the hierarchy when you're focused on an act of creation. That's something that we can all relate to, I think. Okay, so we learn that he's been, oh, and by the way, I'm talking without pause, but please, anybody raise your hand or contribute
There is a
something.
question in the chat
Okay, great.
from Andrew. Chantecler ended Act 3 by saying that he needed to leave to save his song, and Andrew wants to know why.
Sue, do you want to answer that?
Well, he found at the end of the salon interview, he couldn't work out how to sing his song. And therefore, if he'd gone back to the farmyard then, he wouldn't have been able to do his job. He needed to, well, like some of us need a holiday sometimes, he needed to get away. And he needed specifically to get away to nature. The salon was being contrasted, wasn't it, all the way through with the natural world. And he really needed to get away from the artifice into nature, and so that he could find his song again, and not just his song, but himself. He needed to find himself, really.
So there's, in a sense, he truly needed to do that, because on having just experienced that betrayal in the salon and the mockery of his song and stuff, he really did need to escape to have this experience and find perspective. But at the same time, it was a mistake, because the idea wasn't, I'll go away for a little while like a holiday and then return. I don't think that's how he was expressing it before. But no.
He did keep in touch with the farmyard, though, as we found out. Through this sort of strange sort of telephone. Of course, telephones were very new in those days. There was a thing called a theatre phone, where if you couldn't get to the theatre, you could subscribe to it and listen to the production in your own home. I'm not sure how that worked, but that's probably what gave him the idea, I think.
It's funny because Rostand is, it just occurred to me that he's getting away to nature and to things more natural, but Rostand has great reverence for human achievement too. And I remember in my visit to Arnaga that one of the first homes. It was not to have a telephone. There was there was some innovative technology that he had in his home. That it was one of the first, and I can't recall.
I can't think what you mean in his home, but he certainly was one of the first to get a motor car.
Okay.
Yes.
So and also the Cantique de l'Aile, that tribute to flight.
Yes.
I mean, he just regards the pioneers of flight as the greatest of heroes and rhapsodizes about them as much as he does about birds. So it's funny here that we have kind of a combination of he's escaped into nature, but in nature he's found this technology that would be very new to the time.
Yes, but it's natural technology. It is a flare.
Seemingly.
It is a flare.
Yeah. But to the audience, it would be a reference, obviously, to the true technology. So it's just interesting. All right.
It also adds to the humor.
Yes, absolutely. We learned he's been sneaking off and crowing every morning in secret. And despite the warnings of the woodpecker, the pheasant approaches and hears exactly what's going on. And oh gosh, some wonderful lines that fans of the Fountainhead will surely see a connection to. The pheasant says, one took a hayseed off his haystack. Still, one can't become the only one in his soul. She's discovered she's not the only one in his soul. And he says, believe me, when you live in a soul, it's better to meet the dawn than to find it empty.
That is lovely, isn't it? And he goes on to say, there is no great love except in the shadow of a great dream. And that is such a big message from Rostand. And I don't know if anyone's read La Princesse Lointaine, the Far Princess, but the whole play is built around that idea. Yes.
So fans of the Fountainhead, come on, what line is that? Does that obviously connect?
Il n'est de grand amour qu'à l'ombre d'un grand rêve.
Oh, beautiful.
That just follows on from the one you quoted there.
Yes, yes. Kate Nolte Smith says, "Great love exists in the shadow of a great dream only." The translation.
Yes. It's the same idea. We're getting back again to having a dream, having this le rêve is so important in Rostand. Yes, in every play. Yeah.
So without that, she wouldn't be. So the line I'm thinking of course, is in order to say "I love you," you have to be able to say the "I." That's a line from The Fountainhead. But he has to have his dream. His dream is his identity. It's what makes him worthy of. It's what she falls in love with in the first place. It was that moment when she watched him crow for the first time that she fell in love. So without that, if he gives that up for her, he's giving up the very thing that she would be in love with.
And it wouldn't be the same person that she was in love with either.
Right. And then he would no longer feel capable of love because he wouldn't feel that same sense of joy and reverence for life. Okay, so she then, well, I guess it's in the course of the next scene with the toads and the nightingale. Oh no, it's before that. She mentions the nightingale song and then she gets her idea, her plan. Shoshana, did you want to?
Anyway, I was just thinking that prior to The Fountainhead, which of course Rostand would not have known, there was a famous poem, which I don't know by heart, Richard Lovelace, "To Lucasta Going to the Wars." And it's got that line, "I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honor more."
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that, the setup here is about the personal relationship versus creation. But I think maybe the classic thing that it comes from is going off to war. Now, I actually think creation is more interesting than war, but people are familiar with war as something that could be an absolute and peremptory ideal. And the sort of the image of the woman, and in those cases, the men would be the ones going after the woman, saying, "Don't go," and I'm going. I have to go, and that's more important. So I think that might be part of, that trope is where it comes from. And as I say, I don't know the poem by heart, but I just looked it up, and it's Richard Lovelace, "To Lucasta Going to the Wars."
Yeah. Thank you for that connection. That's perfect. And we teach that poem at school quite often, and there's a painting that we'll teach in connection with it, which is the Huguenot Lovers, where the image is of him wearing the armband that would indicate that he is, oh gosh, now I don't know, I don't recall the history, that he is not of among the Huguenots. And she is trying to pull it off, or no, somebody who knows this better, fill me in on the history of it. But the idea is that he's wearing, I can't recall if she's pulling it off or he is. I think maybe he is. She wants him to wear this armband to indicate that he's not at odds with the authorities, and he's pulling it off to stay true to his ideals. And so the idea is she's looking for his safety. He is looking for being honorable and true to his ideals, but he just looks at her with this expression in the image of total serenity, that he doesn't feel unsafe. He feels like Cyrano, like it's not unsafe to be true to your ideals. It's much more hazardous to betray them. So that that image and that poem go very well with this moment. Okay, so then we get to the toads and the nightingale. Sue, what do you see? I mean, the toads, for one thing, they're offering false praise to Chantecler that he briefly falls prey to. Yes.
This is what Rostand, this is very personal play, as we've said before. And here the toads represent his enemies in a way. they are envious writers who resent him, but also the critics who do not really love him for what he is, but they use him to castigate other writers. You know, so he is being held up by the toads who want to pour scorn on the writers that are actually very good writers, but very different from Chantecler. And he nearly falls for it because he doesn't know the Nightingale's song himself, which is, of course, what the Pheasant takes into account later. This actual scene caused tremendous offense. You can imagine. It was even booed. And someone said there are obviously toads in the audience as well.
One of the things that stood out to me in this scene, because of what you've pointed out about the culture of the farmyard, is that what they praise Chantecler for is that he's foreign and he's avant-garde. So in the forest, at home, he was the authentic representation of the farm. Here, now he's the foreign and the
exactly. He's the novelty and exotic and foreign, and he's being praised for that as well. So that's the angle in the play, definitely. Yes.
And that's a superficial form of phrase and not what art is meant to be appreciated.
No, it was using him really to criticize other people. He was being used. Not a good thing. No.
And so one of the things I love so much about this scene is that the moment he hears the voice of the nightingale, the toads are done for him. There's not a moment of true feeling of rivalry or envy or competition. There's just pure reverent appreciation for the nightingale's art, and it's so beautiful. And what I was trying to even dream up in my imagination in this scene is what that would be like on stage. How on earth is the nightingale actually singing these lines of poetry? Is it just said in a tone so beautiful that we're spellbound by it? Because
the poetry itself is lovely, but they did have difficulty because nowadays you would just get a recording of a nightingale. So what they had to do, they had to get a man who did impersonations, and he did the nightingale impersonation. But in rehearsal, when they were interviewing him to see if he could do it, he had to run through all his other impersonations first till he got to the right bit, and he couldn't do it otherwise. So I don't know what happened during actual performances, whether he stood in the back trying out, being the train pulling into the station and all sorts of things, and then pushed on the back of the stage where everyone could hear him. When he got to the nightingale, I don't know. It was a real difficulty for them.
Wow, that's totally fascinating. But actually, that helps me envision this scene, that he goes from literally the song of the nightingale. So he's imitating the nightingale song and then into this beautiful poetry. And that's how you would become mesmerized in the nightingale song. But now, as soon as this session is over, I want to go looking for recording of somebody imitating a nightingale song. There must be someone on YouTube who's done this. Stefan.
Yeah. This is such a lovely contrast, isn't it, with the toad scene? I mean, love has replaced hatred, and peacefulness has replaced the kind of atmosphere where everyone is trying to gain something at the expense of everyone else. But it is also the nightingale. You may have noticed that, well, I'm sure you did, about the songs. He actually pays a tribute to his wife, Rosamond. She actually wrote poems as well, and they were published under the title Les People, which he mentions. And of course, it won't come through, will it, in the translation? So he also says this is a song of love. I'm just trying to find it. And
Okay.
the way that Chantecler completes the poem is lovely. He loved these old-fashioned styles of poetry. So this is a villanelle, a medieval form.
Mhm.
And I can't find it. Yes. And the nightingale says, "You are the strong one, and I am the one who sings of love."
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I love that idea too, of every artist having their own form, own distinct soul and form of expressing themselves in art and being true to that. Sometimes if you, let's see, if you have a favored style, for example, it can be tempting to seek things out only from within that style and to use it as the standard by which to criticize other styles of literature, rather than looking at it as each artist is kind of focused on, if it's a truly great artist, they're focused on and drawing out an aspect of life. And it might be their focus and their goals might be very different from another. So yeah, the idea of Chantecler is momentarily self-deprecating in the glory of the Nightingale song, but he says that Kay Nolte Smith throws in modern comparison, but besides this thrilling rhapsody, my song's as crude as Punch's yell. So his is bold and a call to action and a call to work, and the nightingale is love, but there's an important purpose for both.
Yes, and this is so true of life sometimes, isn't it? You wish you see someone maybe singing soprano. I mean, I'm an alto and I'm quite envious of sopranos, but it's just as good to sing alto.
Yes.
It's all to do with being yourself again, being true to yourself. And it's a universal thing. You think other people are better than you, but this is made very clear that you have to produce your own voice, and Rostand here is doing that. I found the bit I wanted. It's Je suis le chant. Yeah, about the nightingale sings, Je suis la chanson éternelle. Now that was the name of one of Rosamond's poems, which was set to music by a well-known composer of the time, whose name I can't think under stress, but it's everyone would have recognized that. So he's paying her a compliment. And this is a song of love as well. Yes.
Shoshana, did you know who that was?
Well, I didn't know, but I've got your book here. So it's I'm just saying, it's over here. Cécile Chaminade.
That's
right.
right.
Note
Thank you very
65.
much, Shoshana. Yeah,
Right.
Chaminade. Cécile Chaminade,
Right.
very popular writer
Okay.
for piano pieces and salon pieces.
Right.
And
So the book remembers better than than the writer. And you
well,
also mentioned in here something else that might be interesting, which is that Polichinelle, the Punch character, was in Rostand's mind as he was going to write a play about him, and then he puts him instead into La Dernière Nuit de Don Juan.
Yes, which I've got on Kindle, a translation of that. And Polichinelle is what we call Punch.
Punch, right.
Yes, that's right. So in fact, Rostand planned a trilogy, but he didn't have time to write it all. But La Dernière Nuit de Don Juan is very witty and well worth reading. Yes, it's on Kindle as The Last Night of Don Juan.
Okay. More to discover. Stefan.
So I saw a parallel between this story and Cyrano and even Ayn Rand's work, where you would normally have like a conflict between moral men or rational men, but it's the same thing, I guess. And the idea that, in Cyrano, you think you would have this conflict between Cyrano and Christian because, Roxanne loved Christian, but there wasn't, because he recognized him as a moral man because he's a moral man. And I saw the same thing with Chantecler and the Nightingale, where, you know, he wasn't, you know, you would think he's taking his place, or he, you know what I mean, but he recognizes him as in his favor, or in the same work in a sense. So I just saw that, like, there was no conflict there.
No.
So
It's funny how all Rostand's work echoes his other work. And when you come to this beautiful scene where the whole forest is stilled, listening to the voice of the nightingale, there's a very clear reference to an earlier play, the one he wrote before Cyrano, actually, called The Woman of Samaria, La Samaritaine. That's the biblical story of the woman at the well that Jesus spoke to. I think she'd had 6 husbands. Anyway, he converted her. And that, again, is a lovely story. Sarah Bernhardt's start in that one. And that's on Kindle as well, The Last Samaritan, The Woman of Samaria. But the actual thing is, the reference is cette source où chacun trouve ce qu'il a besoin de boire. Sorry, I've got 2 lots of papers here, and I'm trying to find the reference. Yeah, Chantecler says, in English, it will be, what is this source, this fountain, where each animal, understood, finds the water he needs to drink? And that is exactly what the woman of Samaria says. I have been looking all my life for this water, which I need to drink. It is the water of life. So it's the same idea that keeps cropping up everywhere in Rostand's plays, really. Yes.
Raj.
I agree with, you know, like what people have said about, like, that Chantecler and the Nightingale are different. They both have a different kind of song, and they have a strength, and we all kind of should internalize that. Nevertheless, I think it's also true that neither Chantecler or the Nightingale have found peace with this, because to quote the lines, Chantecler says, "Oh, to be a sound that soothes and lulls," and the Nightingale says, "To be a splendid call to duty." Chantecler says, "I make nobody weep." The Nightingale says, "I awaken nobody." And there's a line that is Rostand's comment about this, which precedes this dialogue, I think, if I remember correctly, is learn, comrade, this sorrowful and reassuring fact that no one, cock of the morning or evening nightingale, has quite the song of his dreams, which is kind of acknowledging that, unfortunately, the grass is greener on to use a cliche, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, I guess.
Yes. Yes, as somebody has just put it up, they complement each other, really. Yes, they do.
But that's not how they feel. I'm sorry, but I apologize for interrupting. My point was that we are all emphasizing what it should be, but in the play, unfortunately, neither Chantecler nor Nightingale sees it that way. I
don't know that I see it the same way, because it's in the moment when he's listening to the Nightingale song, he says, I'm not capturing that in my art. What he's capturing here is not what I'm capturing. And for a moment, he's completely focused on the Nightingale song, and it's, if I could only do that. But then the immediate thought afterward is, and the Nightingale recognizes this too. They're sort of reminding each other. That's how I see it, reminding each other that, no, you have your soul in your art. I have mine. Neither of us can be all things in art.
And it's all, well, it's all part of this theme that running through, that Chantecler is finding himself, his true self. Perhaps we could talk about that later. It's the idea of individuation.
Sure. So that
when they both have their jobs to do, and they need their self-respect. So although they might admire another person's song, they need to do their own thing. They need to do what they're there for, basically. Yes.
And thinking about it in terms of those struggles of the artist, this is one of those struggles, that you hear another artist that you revere and you admire what they're doing in particular, and it can provoke a moment of self-doubt. But the reason I think, Raj, that I see it more hopefully than you do in terms of where they come ultimately is that that's a moment, and then that moment use it to refocus yourself on what your particular calling is. I can relate to this. I can relate to this so completely, for a reason many of you will understand. When I listen to Shoshana's lectures, I think, I can't do that. I can't do what she does. And then I go back to my desk and I think, okay, but I need to do what I do. That's all right. I love that she exists and that she can benefit me and achieve things that I can't. My approach or my focus, my goals are a little bit different, and also just have to be an expression of whatever I am capable of. So maybe that's one of the many ways that I draw upon this play for inspiration. Shoshana.
Right. Well, remember when we got sure
Yes,
when we
sorry,
got together, of course, I can't and don't do what you do. And I commented that if we were in a modern TV show or movie, we would hate each other. We'd be trying to tear each other down, because people sometimes do that. It's as if there's not enough room in the world for both of us. But of course there is.
Right.
There is.
You're both necessary. You're both necessary. You really are, in your different ways. You're both necessary. And we're very grateful you're both there.
But I think so that's maybe Raj too, this is why I see it more positively, is that it's funny. I remember Edith Packer, some of you know, the psychologist, saying that envy is a good thing. Jealousy is a bad thing. And it depends how you conceptualize those terms. But her point underneath it was identifying something you aspire to or admire or appreciate and feel a little bit of like, oh, I wish I had that. That's a good thing. That's what, makes us stretches our souls a little bit. But if there's rivalry and bitterness in there, then it's a negative. So whether those are the right terms or not, I don't know, but I understand the underlying spirit. So when I feel admiration for something that Shoshana does, there might be a little bit of, oh, I wish I could do that. There's like a little bit of I wish that I had that particular talent, but that's not, ultimately that doesn't feel like a negative to even have that moment of envy of not possessing the same talents or strengths.
Whereas what the pheasant is feeling is actually jealousy, because she feels that Chantecler is giving to the son what is rightly hers. He should be more wholehearted in his love of her. So that is jealousy. She is torn by jealousy, isn't she?
That's a great contrast. Yeah, thank you. Raj.
I learned from my children that one must do close reading, that when we say something, we must support it in the text, by where is their proof of this statement. So I just wanted to quote one more line to support my idea that even though we all wholeheartedly agree that this is how it should be, they have not found peace in this, and prefer, not only that they don't come to this conclusion that I'm good at this, you're good at this, that they prefer the others. Like, so there's one more sentence, like it says that it's right after that passage that I quoted, like the Nightingale says, like, what can you do? I mean, you sing on, that's my comment. Sing on even while knowing that there are songs which he prefers to his own song. So the word prefers to me illustrates that they still would rather be like each other, but they accept the reality and they go on, which is, like maybe, I mean, this is just an inner struggle.
So even that, let me just try to take on, even if I want to go back to the text and find support for my perspective, which I think maybe doesn't come quite in that scene, but comes later in the ultimate resolution of this play. But even with that idea, I prefer his song. Well, there might be a way in which I prefer to be, I'm not an entrepreneur, but like if you're an entrepreneur, you might prefer to be Jeff Bezos. You might see him as superior, but does that mean you regard your own work, your own what you are capable of. You might think he's better in some way, but it doesn't change what your calling is and what your devotion is. And
Exactly.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Well,
Sue.
we are only, we're not actually, we're still reading this scene, and Chantecler hasn't yet recovered, or he hasn't yet learnt properly himself. He's by the end of the act, Chantecler has discovered what he stands for, and he fully believes in what he is doing. And he's not envious of anyone at that stage. He is still, if you like, immature in a kind of way, that he is rather resenting the beautiful song, not resenting, admiring this song and thinking, yet he hasn't yet discovered his real reason for being what he is. And that will come later in the scene. So for the moment, he is, yes, he says, oh, I wish I had a song like that. But later on, he will rise above that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That he's a little bit still in the grips of the betrayal. He's run away. He was betrayed by his home. He's run away. He's listening to the Nightingale song. And then it all comes together in that when he's betrayed by the pheasant.
And of course, he's
I think Paul's.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Paul. Mm-hmm.
Reconcile the nightingale and her sweet song with in the earlier portions of this play, the creatures of the night were a bunch of killers. So how does this nightingale survive amongst this a bunch of killers that only live within the darkness?
She's an evening bird, isn't she?
She's an evening bird. She's not one of the birds of the dark.
Right.
She just happens to sing in the evening, but she's not a bird.
She's in the evening. You're right. I'm sorry.
I had the same question when I was reading it, which is the only reason it was that went through my head. I also love in the description. So you said, what kind of stream can it be where each one finds the water he needs to drink? That scene of questioning each of the forest animals, and they each see their highest values reflected in the Nightingale song. I love that as a description of just the power of art for all of us to give us fuel for our own values.
It seems like the Chantecler and the Nightingale, they're kindred spirits.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
They both admire beauty and love. They are both on the same side, if you like. They're on the side of the light. Yes.
That's true. They're on the same page.
Yes.
Raj.
Thank you.
I regarding this thing about like to be a fountain from which each can find what is the sentence? I can't. What fountain in which each finds water for his thirst? I just wanted to point out that, like Lisa, you were saying about the humor, that it's a beautiful. There's reverence. Like he's asking each person like what they find at this fountain, so to speak, and then he inserts the humor where the woodpecker says something about the Greek. I don't have it in front of me, some Greek reference, and there's humor there. I just felt like it was jarring that you're in a scene, you're seeing a scene where you're in a tone of reverence. You're like, this is so true and all that. And then boom, the humor comes. It seems like it sabotages in the play when he inserts the humor at a point where there should be. So if he was alternating between seriousness and humor, there is something in Rostand's mind that kind of he just can't go 100%.
Oh, I don't see it not going 100%, but I do. It would, like I said, it would have to be played very carefully. So you'd have to see the laughter as not at odds. But so the whole Rostand's soul is the soul of Cyrano, which is panache, right? And he defines panache as laughter in the face of danger. So it's not laughter that's derisive. It's not laughter that's undercutting. It's a laughter of joy and an unwillingness to to take evils seriously in a way. So I think I see this as Rostand's distinctive spirit, to be capable of this absolute reverence and still be able to seamlessly blend it with humor. But it would be hard to pull off and not have it undermine the seriousness and reverence of the tone.
I'm not sure which bit you're referring to, Raj. After the piece of all the animals listening, where did you find a sudden piece of humor that upset you?
I think it was Aristophanes or something.
Oh, well, that was a bit earlier, wasn't it? That was the thing about Aristophanes was a bit earlier. I mean, I don't think that's in this particular. Oh, sorry, you're absolutely right. Yes, but yes, I found it. Yes, that's right. He asked the woodpecker, and Chantecler stops him very quickly when he says Aristophanes. Yes, that is humorous. That's true. I'd forgotten that bit. But that's the whole point. He was interrupted very briefly, but it is humorous. I'd forgotten that. Yes.
But it's so consistent with the woodpecker's character, and he just
yes,
stops
exactly.
him and moves along. Yes, I know. Spider. let's get to what the spider says.
I love the way he brings in the star. He even addresses the star. If you remember in Act 1, Patu has to summon up all his courage to say stars. And so here Rostand's deliberately saying, he in the end, he talks to the star as well. And the star, there's quite a lot of religious imagery here, isn't there? Because then the star says, the song reminds me of the shepherd. It's, yes. I mean, you mustn't take it too literally that he's speaking to the star, but that, in a play you can, of course. And that he gets higher and higher and more ideal and less near reality and more religious. Yes.
Also back to briefly to the scene with the nightingale and Chantecler. This is where I want to emphasize stage directions again, because the nightingale says, I can't wake anyone up. But then it says, but after this moment of regret, he continues in a voice that grows ever higher and more lyrical. So I think these things are experienced as momentary, and so much of this is a struggle that the producer has to overcome. So I just think of that as a momentary. There are so many sources of self-doubt and self-questioning and fear that you won't have the effect that you want to have. And then with each of those, that's what I think of the play as overall. With each of those doubts that he faces, he has to reorient himself back to what he's doing and what the purpose of his work is, and that it is fully satisfying to him to be true to his own calling.
And Chantecler will do the same himself later in the act. He will crow even more loudly after his moments of self-doubt.
Yes.
So yes, and this is what you do, isn't it? You solve it in your own mind. Right, well, I must get on with it then. This is what I'm here for. Let's just do it.
Yes. Warren.
Yeah, I was looking forward, I guess, in scene 5, in the middle of this reverent exchange between Chantecler and the nightingale. He's got these toads coming in, with these counterpoised little comical things, but they're very revealing. We welter in malignity, is the way the translation we're reading goes. And on like that. At the end of every little beautiful song of the nightingale, there's this it's comical and it's quite revealing about, he seems to have the comedy associated with the creatures he despises.
Yeah. There is one of the things I love about that scene is that the nightingale sings. There's this kind of counterpoint with the toads, and then Chantecler joins in, and as he does, the toads start to fade into the distance. And so it's dramatically showing the power of their songs together to dispel the evils that they're out to conquer. We see the toads fade into oblivion.
That's right. Love will conquer all.
Paul?
Oh, it goes back to, again, there's, it seems like when the night is fading, the nightingale says to Chantecler, he must sing in the dawn. So the nightingale is not just an evening bird. This is the night giving way to the dawn. So not quite all in the evening, the nightingale. That's over. That's it.
Thank you. So let's talk about the pheasant's plot. She knows that the song of the nightingale will transfix Chantecler so much that she can keep him distracted, and the sun will rise without his call. And it's even worse than that, because she's consoling him for the death of the nightingale and drawing him under her wing. It's quite awful what she does. Good thing she redeems herself. Yes,
she is just using the nightingale song for her own ends as well. It's all for her own ends, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
So then we come to the moment, the climactic moment, that it says, the stage directions say, with the greatest cry of sorrow that a being can emit, he cries out, no. It's true. So in that moment, he accepts that it's true. The sun will rise without him. And this has been his secret. This has been the something that he believes fundamentally about himself that seemingly has been taken away from him all at once in that moment. And it's just utterly devastating. And so the question that it gives rise to, that we've raised earlier, is, was he deluded, and is this the revelation of the truth? And I think how we interpret that will inform what we see as the theme of this play, or the overall meaning of the play. Stefan, did you have something first?
I just had a question. Do you think that, I mean, I think we could all agree that the pheasant had made a mistake trying to expose this of him, but at the same time, he wouldn't have had this new revelation of self. So I just want to pose that and see what you guys thought about that.
It wasn't
that
her.
Doesn't make it any better, does it? That doesn't make it any better at all. I mean, for dramatic reasons, yes, he had to discover, but it doesn't excuse her behavior. And he cries out, what betrayal, what a betrayal. And he's not just talking about the sun, though he does feel the sun has let him down, but he's talking about the pheasant has betrayed him as well. And then she has these sort of almost, these aphorisms she uses, one is everything for a soul, but nothing for a horizon. And 3 times she does this. And what else did she say? You see, don't you, that a heart which embraces you so closely is more worthwhile than a sky to which you are not necessary. And he says, yes. And of course she goes on, and the shade, the shadow, after all, is just as well as the day when there are 2 of us together in the shade. I mean, these are appalling suggestions that she passes off as common sense, or what everyone would agree with. And he he's taken by surprise and goes along with it until he really registers the fact that no, this is not right.
So the question then is, did he discover that he's not necessary? Is it true? Did she reveal a truth for him? And I think that the difficulty of answering this question really changes how people feel about it, because either you can think, yes, she revealed the truth, and he, in order to do what he does, must deny that truth in himself. He has to pretend it's not real and embrace an ideal apart from reality. And I just don't experience the play that way. So one of the lines that comes up immediately is he recovers himself at once and someone says to him, "What night is there left for you to conquer?" And he says, "That of the island." So he discovers that even if in a sense it's true that I don't literally cause the sun to rise, I'm causing people's eyes to open to the sun. And speaking metaphorically in terms of the role of a poet, I kind of hinted at this before when somebody asked me a question about it, but there's two ways that I personally look at this, but I'm happy to entertain pushback on this point. But one thing is that if we're talking about the doubts of the artist or the doubts of the creator of anything, the passionate creator of anything new, there are going to be times constantly that they think, I see in the most powerful terms how this is going to benefit people, what good this is going to bring to the world. I see it, and my seeing it is what makes it capable for me to do my work, that I believe in this so strongly. And in the course of that, every creator has to have a moment of people feeling, but others won't get it. I fear that others won't understand. I fear they won't see what I see. I fear that they won't believe me. So one way I view this is just an incredibly beautiful, dramatic presentation of the fear of not being believed, in that sense of being so passionately devoted to something that you believe would be of benefit to everybody. And then there's that voice in you that's saying they won't believe me. And so here it becomes true. They don't believe. That belief doesn't exist. Does that fit?
Well, we're talking about the truth. Now, there's more than one kind of truth. There is reality, what you see and you touch. And there's also a higher truth, if you like, which is what Chantecler has found here. He's found a different kind of truth. Okay, so the sun will rise without me, but I'm still essential. I still have a job to do. You know, it's not clear cut. Okay, the sun will rise, I'll give up. No, not at all. He has understood that he has a calling which he has to listen to, which is more important. And you know, the two kinds of truth that faces us all our lives, doesn't it? I mean, what you can see and touch. I mean, well, I love Jung, and Jung talks about this a lot, really. Different people experience reality in different ways. There's what you can touch and feel, that's the sensation type. And there's the intuition. You have an intuitive truth, and that's what Chantecler is getting now. And as you say, I think, Lisa, you're right about the creative person, that perhaps they have this to a very high degree. And Rostand, this is such a personal play. And Rostand, after all the excitement of Cyrano, and he was being exalted, really, and saying, you know, you've brought French poetry back to life. And it's he hasn't had that experience audiences haven't always listened to him. They haven't always liked his plays. But he has to keep on writing them. That's the point. So he's defending himself here as much as Chantecler. Yes.
So I think my view, I would express my view a little bit differently, but it's, I think, very connected to what you're saying here, that and this goes back to Heather. I think I was hinting at this before when you asked your question. So there's a sense when you create a world like Cyrano de Bergerac or Chantecler or any kind of romantic view of the world, that someone could say, but that's not true. That's not reality. That is not what the world actually looks like. And that's the sense in which you're saying the things that you can see and touch. The world doesn't exist without night. So a romantic presentation of the world, a stylized romantic presentation of the world, you could say is not true in a sense, but in another sense, it is true. And it is true in the sense of it's important to take on a view of the world that filters out what's inessential and looks at it in terms of the values behind what you see and not just the actual literal complete reality of it. It's really a crucial outlook to be able to take on the world. So you could argue that an idealized picture of the world is not true, or you could argue that it is true, but it requires a value orientation to be able to possess that outlook on the world that actually exists. And also, it's true in the sense that in the moment of creating these universes, he has to really believe in the possibility of the world he's projecting, both to the extent that it exists in the world around him and to the extent that it will exist in the future. So that goes back to the Hugo preface that I talked about, that as long as these evils exist in the world, books like this are necessary, books like this are not useless, that he feels instrumental in creating the world that he wants to exist and has to believe in its possibility wholly when he's in the act of creation. So first of all, my favorite line in the whole play, and the one that I literally call to mind constantly, is, but how can one take heart when he doubts the work? Kane Oldie Smith's translation is, he sets to work with all his heart. Or in the Gertrude Hall, it was buckle down to work. I think that was and I just love that as a clarion call reminder that, yes, everybody's going to experience doubts and that they won't be believed, that it's not going to have the effect that they want, that others won't see, but it doesn't matter. You just keep working. And then this line, I think somebody put it in the chat too, so thank you for reading my mind. Let's see. But if you're not the one who makes the morning come, then I'm the cock of a still more distant sun. My cries and piercing the veil of night leave scars, those slits of daylight we all take for stars. So even if he thinks, no, in my lifetime, I'm never going to see this ideal realized, in the process of devoting myself to the ultimate realization of that ideal, I'm living it now. So I think of it as, if the saying, those who fight for the future live in it today, those who fight for the ideal experience the ideal in the present. That's how I think of him living. So I'll never live to see the ultimate sky that will light our roofs when all those stars draw nigh. But if my song is always loud and clear and loud when I'm no longer here, if every farm has a cock to attack the gray, then there will be no more night. So if it's not literally true now, it takes a concerted effort of idealism to bring that about. All right, there's lots of hands and I've been talking way too much. Who's first?
Yeah.
Yes, that was very comprehensively. So I don't think if I have much to add to that. I agree with you. And I when I was reading Tura Beckman's analysis on this, like how he evaluated Rostand and compared Chantecler to Fountainhead, he's saying that there's this, conflict between what is ideal and what is real. But I agree with you in that the ideal is necessary, and then how you go about achieving it and pursuing it, the pursuit of it is the important thing. And of course, I mean, if you never achieve anything, then we need to question that. But your work may not be the great master or whatever, but you can still create value, and that's what Chantecler is saying. I'm still routing the eye of the night of the eyelid. Yeah, and that. So thank you for that analysis. That was very helpful.
Yeah, he might not have direct causal efficacy in that sense of making the ideal, the world around him suddenly look ideal, but he's directing everyone toward the ideal, and thereby, living it in the present. Because if you take that focus on your vocation, then you are living the ideal and bringing about a world that looks more like the one he wants to see in the long run.
And it's the same with Cyrano. I mean, Cyrano doesn't, so he doesn't get what he really wants, but he at the same time he's getting Roxane's love, but in a different way.
I have to think about this, how to articulate this, but one of the reasons Cyrano, I always claim Cyrano is my very favorite play, and then I read Chantecler and said, oh, I'm not so sure. I think Chantecler might beat out Cyrano, but I teach Cyrano every year and know it like the back of my hand, so that gives it familiarity, attachment. But I think Chantecler is more hopeful than Cyrano is, and I think there's more of an integration of the ideal and the real and the practical than there is in Cyrano. Sue, would you agree with that?
I'm thinking that the Chantecler is a much more psychologically complex play than Cyrano. And what we see is Chantecler discovering what his real vocation is through having to accept that it's not what he thought it was. He has discovered this, but he has grown from this discovery. I mean, later on, there's a remark that, what will the old hen say when you get back? You've grown. And he has grown, and he has learnt so much through being in the forest and meeting the toads and the nightingale. It's a different play altogether to Cyrano. Cyrano is a lot more limited in a way in its action. I mean, this one has such far-reaching consequences in the terms of the character of the chief. Cyrano is the same all the way through the play, basically. But Chantecler has developed. He has developed himself. He has reached what Jung, I'm so fond of Jung, Carl Gustav Jung calls individuation, which is a goal for every human being, to discover what they're really here for, what is their specific purpose. And that's what they need to work on, and not worry about whether they like their song or not. They need to get on with what they are.
Joseph, who's next?
Heather.
Yeah, I loved this scene, and I loved Chantecler's reaction to being betrayed by his ideal. And it made me think of a line of his from earlier up when he was talking to the blackbird in an earlier act. And he says, do you know the one thing upon earth worthy that one should live wholly for its sake? And the blackbird doesn't know. And Chantecler says, that thing is effort, blackbird, effort, which uplifts and ennobles the lowest. And so to me, it's the ideal is what inspires him to put in the effort, but it's the effort that matters, and the effort that makes him who he is, and the effort that never betrays him, because even when the ideal doesn't hold up, the effort is still there and gives him something to fall back on.
Yes, and it's the effort that makes his song so special as well, isn't it? That's made very clear. Yes, because he puts all of himself into the song.
And
Yes, I'm
that
glad you brought that up again. That's very good.
it's
Yeah.
him doing his work, and his work is to call others to their work.
Yes.
That goes back to those earlier acts too.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, this is the theme, really, isn't it? We get on with our jobs, basically, get back to work. Yes. But another thing that convinces Chantecler that he has got the right job, that he is doing a good job, is the reactions of the birds of the night. That you know, he hears them saying, "Oh, he didn't sing," and they're so joyful. So they say, "Yes, that's obviously something I'm here for, really. I'm here to fight the night and the creatures of the night, and to support the day and bring on the day in every way. Yes, even if I don't make the sunrise, I'm still essential." Yes.
Oh, and just a sweet line to echo what you said about his development over the course of the play, when Chantecler says, once my old nurse sees that I've come back from your cool glades where love and pain are mingled, what is she going to say? And Patou, imitating the affectionate old voice, says, he's grown. He has grown.
Yeah, he's found himself. Yes. Yeah.
Joseph, who's next?
Steph, and then Shoshana.
It seems like at the beginning, when the pheasant hen falls in love with Chantecler and he's doing his song, she wants that beauty for herself, and which creates a conflict then between his work and her, which is like it's a contradiction that has to be resolved, because she can't have, you kind of mentioned this before, but she can't have him unless he's doing his work. And that becomes resolved at the end when I think she's missing the point at the beginning. You know,
Yes,
she's too
yes.
focused on the fact it's not the point. It's what did you fall in love with? And that's what she figures out at the end. What I really fell in love with was him. So
Shoshana?
And then
Okay, I hope this isn't a long digression, but just exactly what you were saying about, what Chantecler learns and so on. It reminded me of a play by John Logan called Peter and Alice. And I put in the chat a 7-minute YouTube of me talking about it. And I mean, you can copy it, but basically, I'll try to make this short, but it's a true story. Peter, who was the inspiration for Peter Pan, and Alice Little Hargreaves, all grown up, who was the inspiration for Alice, they meet in a bookshop and talk. And he basically wants to escape from ideals that's been haunting him all his life. And she says no. She talks about what Charles Dodgson gave to her in creating her. And she says, it's given me a lifetime of people looking back at me with a growing smile, remembering their better selves when they were new and life was before them. And all they needed to find their way through was a little courage, a little imagination, and a bottle labeled "Drink Me." And then she talks about the difficulties of her real life. And she says, and I'm old and it's cold, and I had to sell the manuscript he gave me in order to heat my house. But I could choose to think of that, or I could choose to live in Wonderland. And she tells Peter, take my hand. I'll take you there. Anyway, I read from it for about 7 minutes and talked about the play. Judi Dench played the part, and I am not Judi Dench, but at least I could read the words. And I think you'd like it. I mean, I think that it fits in with what we've been saying. And I especially recommend the play. And if Judi Dench ever does it again, go see her. So that's it.
That's a wonderful digression. And
Yeah.
I love that image of her. Is her world ideal, or is it not?
Yeah.
Well,
I sit here in that room at the top of the house and I think about my life, and I shut my eyes from time to time and imagine being warm in the summer, and I hear the bees buzzing. And for a moment, I truly am Alice in Wonderland. And do you have the heart to tell me I'm not? That's very Chanteclerish, right? I can be the lonely old woman in the drafty room, or I can be Alice in Wonderland. I choose Alice, take my hand, we'll go together.
But
It's
I
good.
can see somebody making the accusation that that's her being delusional or
Right.
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 But it
Yeah.
does, that's not the spirit of it. The spirit
Yeah.
of it is I'm going to make a choice of where I focus my attention and my
Yeah.
efforts. And then that's what I'm actually living.
Yeah. And the actual Peter, he
Mhm.
ended up taking his own life.
Mm.
I mean,
Yes,
that's not, you don't see it happening in the play, but it's part of the force of the play is that if you push all of that away as if it doesn't count,
Mm.
that's a bad choice.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's true too.
Thank you for that
Okay.
recommendation.
Critty is next.
No.
Critty, are you there? We can't hear you. Let's go to Warren.
Yeah, I also love this act and all the ennobling lines in it, but I want to be a little bit of a dissenter here and say the following. So if Chantecler had left it at I am the cock of the eyelid, and if he had left it at when mornings are gray, I give people the sense of light with my song, I would fully agree that it's the integration of the real and the ideal. But there's a couple of other lines where now he's switching context from the reality of concrete events to possibility, to this this idea of promoting the ideal when he says things like, my voice is the voice of a remoter son. And when he says things like, my song from yesterday was so strong, it must be continuing on, even though I didn't raise the dawn. And there's a little bit of light peeking through the night sky with the stars. So I think that dramatically, that switch of context from concrete reality to possibility without kind of alerting the reader or without providing that context, leaves doubt about whether or not there's residual delusion. I'll throw that out.
Well, so
Not predominant, but residual.
But I just thought of that as those who fight for the future live in it today. I mean, if you're fighting for the future, it might be a future that's beyond the scope of your lifetime that you're fighting for, but you're living in it today. So you are living in it today, and you are believing that you can be efficacious in bringing it about. It's just that you might not directly see the results. You directly see the results in the sense of the identity you have and the life you're living and the devotion you're giving in the moment. So you're seeing the immediate results in that sense. But there might also be a part of it that is, and in doing that, I'm contributing with all the other cocks crowing in their valleys to bringing about that ideal in the world, but I accept that I might not. So I just imagine again, Hugo writing Les Miserables and having someone sit him down and look him in the eye and say, this will have no impact in your lifetime. You will not see all of these evils vanish from the earth. Now, Hugo, I think truly, at least from Les Miserables itself, truly believed that eventually that world would exist, that it was possible for it to. So whether or not it would be brought about in his lifetime, it seems like would be less important to him than that he's living his life devoted to its ultimate realization. So does that not Warren, does that relate to
No,
what?
it helps. I mean, I fully agree with what you're saying. I think, but it's just the switch in context because, you know, you've got two elements in this act or in that particular scene in particular that where there actually is something that is concretely real now. And then he
Yes, but
switches and talks about the future. And that's the part that when Ayn Rand made the comment about living in the future today, if we fight for it, you know, that we can have an entire discussion about plumbing the depths of what that means and exactly how. But I think it's clear then that the context has switched to possibility and what fighting for that possibility actually does for you.
Mhm.
Here it's much more
can I
ambiguous.
Please,
can I
yeah,
say
sure.
something? That I can see what you're saying, that he's switching to what is possible to what isn't possible. But we did say earlier there are at least two kinds of truth. There's the realism truth. Okay, he doesn't make the sunrise, but there's his own truth, which he's talking about now, and he's talking to the pheasant. Now, the pheasant has not a clue about the higher truth at all. She lives in the present world, in reality, and he's answering her and she keeps nagging him. So how do you go on with this? And then the stage direction says, with an obstinate anger, but what if you don't make the sun rise? And he says, answering her specifically, it's because I'm the cockerel of a further sun, hoping to shut her up. And that's how I see it. And it is also his own belief that if he is trying to fight for the ideal in life, that there is a higher truth as well as the truth of what we see and feel and touch. There's another truth that we all know about it.
So
And
you're saying that
is
that switch in context is brought about by her, because he's not saying that's what
Yes.
would be most important,
No.
but in response to her objection, there's still an answer to that too.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I'm sure that's what it is. He is trying to somebody who has no idea about other kinds of truth other than what she can see and touch and smell and so on. He's trying to explain in a concrete way what he's doing. Yes.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know if
mean,
that satisfies you, Warren, but
no,
that's how I see it.
It helps, and seeing it in that light is better. I have to think about that, but yeah, just the interesting switch in context here, and it obviously raises this question about whether or not he's got some elements of illusion left, or whether he's really addressing that he's fighting for an ideal which has the possibility of existing at some future time.
Yes,
Thank you.
exactly.
Appreciate it.
Raj?
I'm really grateful to Lisa and to Sue, because I think I would have gone through my life without reading this play. In retrospect, I feel foolish that because I loved Cyrano so much, it seems idiotic of me to think that Rostand could have written such a great play and the rest of his plays were not worth reading. I don't know what I was thinking. And now I have to read all of them as soon as possible. I do agree with, like, I also feel like Sue and Lisa that this play in certain sense is much deeper, much more sophisticated than Cyrano, especially the act 6, like he starts like with commentary about society, and there are many important things that he comments on, but then in this act 4, he really goes deep inside and the inner conflicts and the issues and how they are overcome. So so it is incredibly sophisticated, and I think I'm going to read Act 6 over and over. And I just one last quick comment is that, I mean, in the end, the play is about work. Like they say, work and love, they are two important things in life, and it is about work, but then it also brings about how love can be an obstacle in certain situations, can appear falsely to be a conflict. And I wanted to point out a line which was not discussed yet, which is a perfect answer, Rostand's answer to this apparent conflict between work and love. He says, I love you, but I should poorly serve the work to which I devote myself anew at the side of one to whom it were less than the greatest thing in the world.
That's a
Yeah,
great line.
Absolutely. Mm.
I wanted to add in another line on this theme of living the ideal. It says, he says, when animals awake on a day that's gray and dare not believe in waking, then the brass of my song stands for the sun. So it calls them to the ideal, even under difficult circumstances. Raj, thank you for that comment, because clearly for both Sue and me, having people appreciate Rostand and desire to read more of his work is part of our calling. So it's nice to experience that being heard. Shoshana.
Okay, we're at time, but when you said that about if someone sat, you go down and said, this is not going to happen. He already answered that one. He said, right? He said, if a writer wrote only for his own time, I might as well break my pen and throw it away.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah. So he answered that one. And Ayn Rand quotes it in the intro to the 1968 Fountainhead. And she sort of answered it too, when she said about her own death, well, that'll be the end of me, but I don't think it'll be the end of my philosophy. And this whole play, I think there's some sense in which in order to be in it at all, you need to forget that the animals outside my house do not talk. And that if I had a rooster there, it would not be Chantecler. And so you already have to make that jump to a different kind of story. And in it, things can be different. And one last bit, Ayn Rand, someone said to her once, that sort of thing that you write about, that couldn't happen. That couldn't happen. And she said, tell them from me that it happened in the Fountainhead. Okay. So, Chantecler, it happened in Chantecler, and that there is something true about his belief, which is even if there's contrary evidence to it in our world. Just saying. So that's it.
Thank you.
Well, it also happened, if I may just say, it happened for Rostand as well, because he carried on writing. And it was his destiny to write, and he carried on writing. So this wasn't his last play. There were others. He took his own advice, basically.
So I mentioned at the outset that this was one of my favorite plays, one of my favorite works of literature, and perhaps the one I call upon the most often personally for inspiration. So I think that's probably clear now why that is. Just this exploration, internal exploration of all the struggles of anyone trying to create anything, the demands of love and family, the fear that your creation won't be understood, doubt in your own abilities is going to come up from time to time, self-doubt as a consequence of comparison with others, the temptation to just give up when things are hard and run away, falling prey to false praise. I mean, there's just so many dimensions to the struggle, and the ultimate message is, what do you do when you doubt the work? You buckle down to work. And I just think that this was that sentiment was presented with such dramatic power that it feels like it's a part of me now, and I just love it so much for that. Sue,
I'm very grateful that I was invited to take part, because I just love this play, and I'm now convinced more than ever that I must at least attempt a translation, and it'll probably take quite a while, but I will do it. I will do it.
Wonderful. That's
so a few things. One question, Raj wants to know from both of you which play he should read next from Rostand. Which Rostand play?
Did you read The Romantics?
The romantics, yeah. I would say
It's not the one I would put at the top of the list. I'm just mentioning it because it's in Read With Me with commentary. So if you want a guide, I did a cast reading of it with some friends of mine that I think was absolutely delightful. And there I have commentary on it. So that's one that you could read with guidance, but it's not because I think it's the best of his other plays. I just love it.
Well, I would really recommend, especially with that last act in mind, The Woman of Samaria, which is where Jesus talks to the woman of Samaria, and they have all this talk about love. And another and there is a translation of that because I did one, but there's one that hasn't been translated for a long time, and that is called La Princesse Lointaine, which is, again, very, very significant in Rostand's work. After the Romantics was so popular, Sarah Bernhardt started to take an interest in him, and she starred in this play. It was very badly understood at the time, but it is a key, someone said later, a key to his work, the Distant Princess, the Far Princess. There are some good translations by American women, actually. So that's a bit more difficult to get hold of, but I have done the Woman of Samaria. And yes, the Don Juan is very entertaining as well. That's available on Kindle as well. But La Princesse Lointaine and La Samaritaine, that's where Rostand's soul can also be found, as well as, especially, of course, in Chantecler.
And perhaps we can persuade Sue to come back and join us again for another play discussion. I will probably make that request.
I so enjoyed it. Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, I'm working on a translation of his poem, En soi à Hernani. So I hope to be able, within the year, to be able to share that. And also when I visited Arnaga, his home in the Basque Country, and I appeared the third day, and one of the people working there finally approached me and said, "Okay, what are you doing here? Why are you back again?" I said, "Because I love Rostand, not just the gardens, not just the pretty gardens. I want to explore every corner." And so he asked what had brought me there. And I think I said something about Cyrano probably. And he said, "Oh, La Princesse Lointaine." That for him, that was the one.
Yes, yes.
That one must read. So
I do hope so. Yes, yes.
And one more announcement. Lisa's commentary for the last day of a Condemned is now in the Read With Me app. So that's more traditional Read With Me format, where Lisa will release the reading each week and then commentary the following week. There's the Facebook group. So you can get that on the website or in the app, depending on your preference, but it is available now. I don't know if, Lisa, you want to have a pitch for why they should read it, but
why? Well, I think
on the slide for them.
I did give a pitch for why you should read it in the email. And also I recognize that I'm holding everybody way over time, but I'm happy to stay. So, but don't feel like you'll be rude if you have to leave. But let's see. I could give a personal pitch, and then I can give the pitch. I have to find it for that I gave in my email, which was an English reviewer called the book "Too Terrible to be Perused More Than Once and Too Remarkable Not to be Perused at All." Hugo, I read the section in the Hugo biography by Graham Robb on this book, and I was fascinated to see Hugo presents it as a plea for the abolition of the death penalty, but Graham Robb seems to think he wasn't being entirely self-aware in that description. He thinks that it was a plea for the abolition of death itself, which makes for a very interesting discussion topic if you've read it. And then Dostoevsky thought of this story as he actually faced a firing squad. He called Hugo's story to mind. So those are some of the motivations that I put out there. But personally, I think I mentioned this last time, but if anybody didn't hear it, what I look to Hugo for is an overwhelming spirit of humanity, of reverence for human life. And in The Last Day of a Condemned, or Last Day of a Condemned Man, he's arguing against the death penalty. I don't know. I don't myself feel confident enough in having a position on the death penalty, but I do believe that it is morally essential to hear out the kind of argument he's presenting to have an informed opinion on it. I think if one were to come to the conclusion that the death penalty is justified, you could only do that in the context of the most reverent respect for the sanctity of a human life. Within that context, you might still come to that conclusion, but that context is vitally necessary. And that's what I look to what I look to Hugo most for, is that feeling of the value of human life. So that raises lots of fascinating questions. I think the ones that come up in my mind are the ones that will be addressed in the commentary. One last thing I'll say about it is that this description of it being too terrible to be perused more than once, I found it a little disturbing that in reading it, unless you're being, how do I put this, very morally attached to the situation, truly contemplating the context, I think a modern audience is not going to find it terrible in the way they ought, because we're becoming immune to horrors. We're being exposed constantly in a very graphic form through media to things that are horrifically awful, and losing a sense of fundamental human decency, and losing the ability to be horrified at what is truly horrible. So one thing I'm doing in this book is it's not going to be terrible in the sense that even my stream on Twitter sometimes ends up being, and yet it is truly terrible. And so I'm trying to really connect with what Hugo is trying to communicate and see what's terrible about it. And I feel like that is elevating my perspective on the world to be able to understand what's so terrible about it. Maybe that makes sense. It will make more sense if you read the story. All right.
Amazing.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So grateful for you giving me your time.
Thank you again.